Hey, it's NPR's Book of the Day. I'm Andrew Limbong. As a reporter, there is something I find frustrating about autofiction, and it's that if I'm using the book to ask a question about this aspect of your life or that aspect, the writer can, at any point, kind of cop out and say, oh, that part's fiction, that part's made up. Of course, it isn't a writer's job to pander to nosy reporters like me, but there's a moment like this that happens in this interview between NPR's Shapiro and the novelist Claire Messud, whose book This Strange Eventful History tracks closely with the history of Messud's own family. And when Ari asks about, oh, what is it like to have the world know so much about your grandparents, Claire Messud does the, oh, it's just fiction thing. But then she follows it up with an explanation of not just what writing is, but what reading is. That's so thoughtful, I can't be mad at it. That's ahead.
I'm Rachel Martin. You probably know how interview podcasts with famous people usually go. There's a host, a guest, and a light Q&A. But on Wildcard, we have ripped up the typical script. It's a new podcast from NPR where I invite actors, artists, and comedians to play a game using a special deck of cards to talk about some of life's biggest questions. Listen to Wildcard wherever you get your podcasts, only from NPR.
This message comes from The New Yorker. What makes a short story work? Explore the minds of writers like Ottessa Moshfegh and George Saunders on the New Yorker Fiction Podcast to find out. Listen to the New Yorker Fiction Podcast wherever you get your podcasts.
Although Claire Messud is a celebrated novelist, she is not the first writer in her family. Her grandfather wrote a book by hand in French that ran well over 1,000 pages. It was part memoir, part scrapbook, and it became a sort of family heirloom.
It is a remarkable collection of documents because it also includes photographs and telegrams and letters and so on. And I didn't read it in its entirety until I was on leave from teaching in 2017. So he wrote it in the 1970s. So it was a real discovery.
That text makes an appearance in Messud's new novel called This Strange Eventful History. It's a work of fiction that closely parallels the author's own family history, beginning in Algeria, 1940.
My father's family was Pieds Noirs, so they were French colonials from North Africa.
That's actually a term I had never heard before reading this book. Pieds Noirs. Literally, it means black feet?
Yes, and it is, I think, a pejorative term that was used about the colonials because they were so poor that they didn't have shoes.
From North Africa, the story travels across decades and continents, bringing us almost to the present day.
I knew almost nothing about my father's upbringing and his history, even though I knew my grandparents, particularly my grandfather, well, but they never really spoke about it. And my father in particular never spoke of it. And I think for him, one of the things that he wanted for us as his children was he wanted us to be North American kids, and he wanted us to be free of history and not to carry the burdens of the past. And so I suppose I probably contravened his wishes in excavating in this way. I realized that I wanted to write about a sort of bigger swath of history leading up to the present. And part of that was that my grandfather's title was Everything That We Believed In. And he was writing about a world really far from my own. And then I realized that my world that I grew up in is far from the world my kids live in. And I wanted to, in a way, capture some of my own experience for my kids.
If you were to sum up what he likely meant by everything we believe in, is this a sort of like post-World War II belief in some international community that can come together? Like what was he actually referring to there?
So this is I think that's, if my father had written such a thing, that would have been what he believed in. Absolutely, a post-war sort of cosmopolitan, boundaryless hybrid world. But my grandfather is sort of the opposite. My grandfather was very, very Catholic. And when he was worried that he and my grandmother might die in the war, he wrote a letter for my father and my aunt, who were then children, to open in the event of their deaths. And he includes it in the memoir. And he says, we are Mediterranean, we are Latin, we are Catholic, we are French, in that order. And
immutable identity categories.
Yes, that's it's important for you to know.
So if your grandfather had the worldview of immutable identity categories and your father had the worldview of a latter half of the 20th century global community that could, ambitiously pursue ideals. What's the view that you and then your children have that you say is different from either of those?
Well, I think that for me, when President Obama was elected, he was somebody I really thought, oh, look, here's somebody whose life is like mine. It's made up of all these different strange things put together.
Indonesia and Hawaii and yeah.
Yes, and it makes an American. Mm-hmm. and I really thought, oh, this is the world that we've known we were moving towards, and here it is. And then I think, here we are. I'm bad at math, but is it 16 years later? And the world doesn't look so much that way right now. It's a time of borders and barriers coming up, and of tribal identities resurging, and it feels a very different atmosphere. And I understand there are lots of sides to that, and some of them are positive and some less so, in the same way that the ideals that my parents' generation had many wonderful things, and a lot of preconceptions and presumptions about, say, white European culture that were not so good. But sometimes it feels as though we've thrown away some good things as well as some less good things.
So to return to the question you raised earlier about whether it's possible to exist apart from history, there's one character who in Argentina wonders if she can exist outside of politics or alongside it, and the phrase is, in a relieved state of semi-detachment. And I think most people have wished that at one time or another. Do you think that is possible? Is it naive? Is it delusional? What is it?
Well, I don't know that it's my place. I don't have the answer. I mean, we can hope. I think it used to be that what the American dream represented to many people in other countries was an ability to live outside or separated from conflict. And I think now, in this time, we see how fraught that is, and how partial and understanding it is, always was, of a sort of American life or identity. So I have to hope that in time people may be freer, but we live right now, it seems, in very politically charged times, and it seems hard to sidestep that.
The character in this novel, based on you, unsurprisingly, grows up to be a writer. And there's a really beautiful line where you say the magic of writing is that we might all share and yet individually create an experience as real as if it had been lived. So how does it feel to know that thousands of strangers will now share the experience of knowing your parents and grandparents more intimately than many of their closest friends and loved ones did when they were still alive?
That's quite a thought. What I would say is that these are fictional characters, and so it's a construction. It draws on those people and their histories, but of course it's subjective and partial. And I'm sure that if those relatives were living, they would say, no, you got this wrong and this wrong and this wrong, and this isn't like me. And they're also fictional elements. But my hope would be, I really believe this Nabokovian idea that the writer and the reader climb the mountain from opposite sides to meet at the top. And when we're reading, each of us is reading with our own histories and our own families and our own pasts. And so we bring to the page those experiences that color and shape a novel. And that's one of the things I love about reading, because each of us makes the book, and when you read the book, it becomes your book and those characters become your characters. So that's my hope.
Claire Messud, thank you so much for talking with us.
Ari, thank you so much for having me.
Her new novel is This Strange Eventful History.
The economy right now is bewildering, impenetrable, inconceivable.
Not when you have the Indicator podcast in your ears. In under 10 minutes every day, we simplify the complicated news, like...
How does inflation drop? What the heck is a SPAC? Why are trendy little high-fiber sodas suddenly dominating store shelves?
And more. Listen to the Indicator from Planet Money and NPR.
Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me isn't just jokes about the week's news, it's also life hacks. For example, here's actor Karen Allen revealing how she got her starring role in Raiders of the Lost Ark.
They said, how well can you spit? And I just found it coming out of my mouth. I said, oh, I can hawk 'em with the best.
I'm Peter Sagal. If you want to increase your self-confidence, then listen to the Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me podcast from NPR.
This is Sam Brigger, longtime Fresh Air producer and sometime interviewer. In a special extended podcast episode, I talk with Maggie Rogers about nostalgia, her new album, and her decision to go to Harvard Divinity School.
I think at its core, music has always been the most sacred and most spiritual thing that I've ever been a part of.
Find NPR's Fresh Air wherever you get podcasts.